So it's my pleasure to introduce Anabel Ford, who will be lecturing to us about the ancient art of the Maya forest garden. I first met Anabel about 50 some odd years ago because Anabel married my longtime mentor in archaeology, Mike Glasso, and that's how I initially became acquainted with Anabel. And I knew when I was in graduate school, Anabel was just finishing up her research in the Maya region. Oops, just a minute. And she was studying the settlement patterns between two major Maya centers. One, which I'm sure everyone has heard of, called Tikal, and the other one was called Yasha. And she cut a break through the jungle between those two Maya centers, a straight line, and then did surveys out from either side in order to document the settlement patterns in between those major Maya centers. And later on, she began to do research in Belize, and at the time, the archaeologists were thinking that the Maya centers in Belize were all along the river valley, the Belize River Valley, along the major rivers. And Anabel knew from her research in the Petén in Guatemala that there were major Maya centers, of course not near rivers. And so she wondered what was up in the uplands. And in the course of her research there, she discovered a new, hitherto unknown to archaeologists, a site it is today called El Pilar. And it's right on the border between Guatemala and Belize. And she then was instrumental in not only in investigating this major Maya site, but also in helping to establish an international park between the two countries, between Belize and Guatemala. And so I'd heard Anabel lecturing about this, her work at El Pilar over the years, and finally, when I retired 2 years ago from the museum, I had an opportunity to go there and see firsthand the site of El Pilar and also see Anabel in action. And what I was very much impressed that her relations with the Maya elders, she was interviewing these people about their knowledge and use of the forest plants, and also getting the names of the plants and checking the names with them. And it was very interesting to see her ethnographic component, of her archaeological work in action. And Anabel and Mike then contributed money, donated money to the Maya, to an organization that is involved with established for the benefit, the economic benefit of Maya people, and they bought a parcel of land, 45 acres, right at the entrance to El Pilar, that is so the Maya people can come and discuss various issues there on that parcel of land. So Anabel's been very much involved in all of this, and we're going to hear even more about her research and in this talk today. So thank you.
Seems far away. Okay, thank you. Well, I just learned, from Macduff that the National Geographic has finally come around, and they don't believe the Maya disappeared. And they think that they actually lived in the area from the time they first occupied, which we can talk a little about in a moment, up until today. Is that the way I understand it, Macduff? Yes. Yeah, so I mean, maybe I'm not. I always thought that I was on the opposite narrative. Can I turn this off?
Oh, that's something to like you, Anabel.
Oh, it is? Well, it's very disturbing for me. Okay. Okay. So, while National Geographic has moved that way and said the Maya haven't disappeared, there's still a major problem in what I feel the regular narrative of the Mayas, that they overpopulated, destroyed the forest, and abandoned the area. And what I hope I can reflect on today with you is to look at those issues. Oh, well, the collapse, and the collapse I want to say, because they that reminds me of the collapse. But is that still okay? Anyway, so overpopulation, which has to cut down the whole forest so they can eat, and then the collapse comes because they did all that and the drought came. So I'm going to show you that all of those are problematic, and those are assumptions based on a narrative that comes from a Western view of this region. So not that I'm not Western, but I've been, I think of them, I don't interview people, well, I guess they're interviews, but they're collaborating with me because I've been saying things like, oh, wouldn't that make a good post? And they think I'm telling a joke. So I have to learn. They're teaching, they're my teachers. Anyway, where did these people come from? One of the things we have to remember is that the heritage of the entire Americas comes from a time period dating back before 12, 15, or even more, 20,000 years, depending on how you look at it, when people were able to come through on a land, overland, all the way down, across the Bering Straits, all the way down. And of course, this is looking at all the way down. This was Sauer, so he didn't think about people coming back. But things are going back and forth. And the populations, once they entered this area, a little more than 2,000 years, they were occupying the whole of America. And they came with skills of observation, use of fire, and stone, nothing else. And of course, we know that there were no animals except, well, we won't say the llama, but I wouldn't say that there was much in the way of domesticated animals. What they did was domesticate the landscape. They tended the landscape in a way that made it a natural phenomenon. I mean, think about it. Elephants. Do you think that they disturb the environment? I might note that they have pretty big feet. So there are ways of disturbing that are also part of the natural phenomenon of the landscape. So what I would suggest today is that I'm going to be looking at how these people expanded and adapted to this area with climate change. I mean, when they came, do you know that it was an ice age then? So ice age sounds cooler than right now. And so things were changing, and they were changing pretty fast when these guys were coming across. And this is one way to look at it. One of the big things people like archaeologists want to look at is what are environmental changes and what are human changes. And here we can see two things. Let's see. What do you think I press? I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, here. Can you see it? I don't know if I, oops. We'll see if I can catch it. I should have done this before. This here, arid and cold in the Petén of Guatemala, which now is never cold. I mean, if people want to go to this area and they want to go when the weather's the best, let's just hope they like it hot and humid. So, but 8,000 years ago was a big change. And this is an environmental change. And this is the notice that's looking at megathermal trees. In fact, one tree, in fact. So we can see, no one's talked about this. This is 5,000 years ago. I was talking to a couple of paleoecologists, and this definitely is something unrelated to rain. This is rainfall here. It's definitely going down the whole time, but it's fairly steady. And so rainfall isn't the reflection here. But rainfall becomes very chaotic here. So this change right here is probably due to climate chaos. But this change here is probably due to humans. And so we want to look at why. And this is pollen. So what people are saying is that when the Ramon, which is the signature for the forest, when the Ramon is not there, that's deforestation. But I want to show you, you don't live by Ramon alone. Okay. So here is the area. You heard a little bit about it from John. Here's Tikal, and here's El Pilar. And actually, I wanted to be as close to Guatemala as I could, but not in Guatemala when I moved, because the situation wasn't very good in Guatemala at the time, yet the kinds of things I wanted to look at were still happening in the area. Thought it was good to look at the river. And then here is El Pilar over on the other side here, right here. This is 50 kilometers away. It's situated really in an ecotone. There's a big escarpment here, and that escarpment, everything drops down. It's quite a bit lower, and in some ways you could say it overlooks it, though I don't think I ever have seen that overlook. Don't need to read it. It's just there. The big thing to say is that they started out small. They're mobile horticulturalists. When that big change happened 4,000 years ago, they started settling down. We start seeing by 3,000 years ago, occupation is noticeable all over the area I've been working. Again, things are pretty hard, I think, and the reason why this climate chaos really induces a lot of challenges for the people on the landscape. But when it settles down, when I say that climate gets settled, that's the classic period. And that's when things really start booming, and the kinds of things that you see, Tikal's pyramids, for example, El Pilar, of course, too. That's when these things are being built from around, let's say, 200 in the present era to about 1,000 in the present era, 1,000 years ago. And there's a big deal made about the collapse, and I have to say that it was something that really entertained myself as well. But when I think of how things collapse, I think of Detroit. I don't know if any of you have been there, but beautiful buildings that were meant to be lasting forever were just literally, people walked away. Schools, the books still there. The train station just left. So you have to imagine there are a lot of different explanations for people to stop investing in maintaining buildings. Taxes, we might know a little bit about those. If you don't pay enough in that, your roads won't be, that's infrastructure. Look at the infrastructure. I work at UCSB. In the years I've been working there, we'll say 81 when I started my project here in Belize, I was in an office where they gave me a phone. I didn't have to pay for it. Now, of course, you don't even have phones. Pretty soon the phone you had to pay for. We had janitorial service every night. We knew the person. They picked up the trash for you. They cleaned. They always swept and cleaned every day. Once a year, they did the polishing, because I live in an area where my office has asphalt tile. If you don't wax, they deteriorate, so they're deteriorating now because I'm not waxing them. So I'm seeing deterioration and lack of investment. Nobody's collecting trash anymore. You have to go get rid of it yourself. Not that it's not possible, but it's interesting. That's in the time frame that I've been working there, 2 cartoon or more. Things have changed that much. So if people come now, you don't have telephone. But of course, we have all cell phones these days. It's different. But anyway, that's just to say the collapse might not be as big a deal. And certainly when Cortez crossed that terrain, crossed right through the areas where I've been working, he brought 3,000 Mexica, and they didn't talk about starvation. So hunches and places where they lived, he's talked about like a week or so of different days that he might not have slept under a roof. So there must have been roofs. I don't think those were made by the monkeys. Okay. So that occupation, the well-drained uplands, when I did the Tikal Yasha work, which as you can see is 30 kilometers here from Tikal to Yasha, I was able to demonstrate that where the highest densities of settlement were always in the well-drained uplands. And especially as we got to the Lake Classic, almost anything that was livable would have settlement in it. So the question was, why did they think that the river was going to be such a pleasant thing? Again, this Western view that rivers are where you should need to be. So, of course, they went to the river and they found settlement at the river, so they decided the river was the focus. But no one had even gone a little bit north. And in fact, it's kind of interesting, you can't see in this map, but the Cayo where we are living is about here. And to get into Washaktun, which was one of the main Chicle camps and also a very important starting point for the Carnegie Institute of Washington doing their archaeological work in this area, you could absolutely miss. These are mountainous. To go through El Pilar would not be sensible if you wanted the, you know, the least resistance. So it's not surprising it wasn't found. So I laid out my little transects, and these are what they look like. And of course, I'd already found El Pilar when I set out the one, because it wasn't going north-south, all the other ones went north-south. But basically, river uplands, well, I think you can answer that right now. The river wasn't as important. There's nothing as big as El Pilar on the river. So, you know, that's to say that, nor nothing is densely settled. So it's where the uplands are where we're going to find it. And so this is approximately, a little more, is about 1,300 square kilometers with areas. I did surveys in other areas a little bit later. But my focus was going to ultimately hone in on El Pilar. So El Pilar, it's a big site. I'd say it's, I mean, Tikal is huge. So maybe it's half the size of Tikal. So when I just say it's a big site, you know, it's a major center. But people come there, they, oh, you didn't tell me it had a big, you know, ceremonial list that had big temples. It's like any Maya site that you might find. You know, it's a big site. Not as big as Tikal. That's true. But in the Maya world, it's the center. And at the time I was starting to work there, there was a lot of interest in Maya culture and nature. They're especially interested in the Maya forest and conservation of the Maya forest. Interestingly, they call it the Maya forest, but they weren't really thinking of the Maya sites there or the Maya people. But of course, international concern for resource conservation and the national responsibilities for archaeological sites is very strongly held in the region, and El Pilar is, Belize is no different. And then really, there's a disassociation. The leadership that's in the villages feels they don't have real access, and it seemed to me that that was a really important thing to address. And since they were teaching me how to understand the Maya forest, it seemed a logical reciprocal feeling. Again, don't have to read it, just know that in the last 20 years I've been doing an awful lot of things. And I started doing the survey, that was big regional. Then I focused on the major site of El Pilar. And then I started focusing on how to get that management plan, with the governments and the politics and the all the different parts, which is quite amazing to try and get that kind of involvement. Now, El Pilar is quite well known locally, not a big destination because it's really different. It's archaeology under the canopy, and I'll be talking a little about that. I always wanted to do the survey of the whole 20 square kilometers. And with the help of Marshall Koval, which I don't know if he's here, but he worked with a mining firm in Guatemala, and he gave a gift to our project of the LiDAR of El Pilar, which really was the guiding base for all the work that I've done since then. It's really been wonderful to understand the Maya site from a standpoint with that wonderful LiDAR. And of course, what I'm still trying to finish, been a little bit of a problem with these hurricanes, so I didn't get to finish the soils work, but that's the last, soils and vegetation are the last thing I'm pulling together for my field work to say that I have a good basis of understanding, not the understanding, but the basis of understanding for El Pilar, past, present, and hopefully future. So this is what the canopy looks like, and indeed my field work is archaeology under the canopy. Do you see this little open area? Yeah, this is just one of the, we'd have also, they also provided my project with air photos. These are air photos. Underneath, this is the LiDAR, what it looks like. So you can see, this is the ground look based on the way we interpret the LiDAR. So you can see that you didn't notice that there was a big project things there, that the Maya were living in this area. Not surprising, they're everywhere. What's attracting these people? Back in that period of mobile horticulturalists, these people are being attracted by good farmland. Remember, these are people who use their skills, their knowledge, their stone tools, and fire to manage the landscape. So they're looking for cultivable land. It's land that they can, with traditional methods, with hand methods, actually cultivate. And the Amazon, and I'm sure you've heard they have been finding fantastic things in the Amazon. So it's also, LIDAR has been really turning things differently there. But in fact, I mean, it's huge. To compare, the Maya forest is a speck on the Amazon, but overall the Amazon has very poor soil. It is, I don't know, I think I'm going to say bazillion, it's many millions of years old. There's almost no topsoil. The main soils are on the river. So when you're looking for sites, you're going to look for waterways. And this Tierra Preta, India, is really middens. And just like if you go out on Santa Cruz Island, you'll see black earth. Guess what? That's Tierra Preta. They just didn't do agriculture there. So the Maya forest has a lot more per square area of good land, and this was a big attraction. And you really can't compare the Amazonian occupations to those of the Maya. It's very, very different. But what is the problem? When you're looking for good land and you're going to use standard USDA or FAO, these are the standard ways you describe soils. And even though we have these great soils, 1% of the world's tropics look like that, the Maya forest with 50% of good soil. It's being evaluated in terms of the USDA. And guess what? Tikal, pictured right there, Tikal. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's big. It's got huge pyramids. It's got, I don't know, what are they, 5 major pyramids that are, you know, stick up in Star Wars pictures, you know. These are giant things. Those weren't built by aliens. They were built by people who lived there. How could that be defined as, this 7 is defined as non cultivable, not cultivable, only good for forestry, only good for forestry. So maybe agroforestry, you know, I don't know. But these are the lands that the Maya preferred, and these are the lands that were absolutely very good. You can see Tikal Yachaz has a lot of that. This is, of course, the scale is going to be really different when we move to El Pilar, which is, this is probably 250, 1 to 250. But the point is that couldn't they just think a little bit about this? I mean, it's not like nuclear science to say, why is Tikal there? Must be good soil, must be cultivable. But of course, they're looking for arable, because of course the best cultivable land is arable. I don't know if you've read E.O. Wilson's The Future of Life. He uses arable. I can't remember. I looked it up in Google books, and it was something like 400 times. There's no arable land. What's good? What the future of life? We don't have arable land, but maybe we have cultivable land. Because when I did a review using 1 to 50,000, the UK, the United Kingdom's soil map, where they said it was not cultivable was where the Maya lived. They admitted it was, you know, high fertility, but it's not arable, not plowable. Doesn't look like this. This is a cross-cutting by putting in a road at Tikal. This is how much you get. This is the soil you get there. It's good soil forming around right underneath the canopy, but this is it, soil and bedrock. You can't plow there. Here's a great picture by Macduff here, and here's a man having he's going to have a great milpa, but there's rocks everywhere. How can you plow this? This is not a place for a plow. You just need to think a little differently, and maybe you can start seeing that cultivable is also as important, and pretty much would give us a whole bunch more land if we started looking at it in terms of Maya forest gardens. So what do we see in the area where I'm working? Of course, I'm not seeing forest gardens. I'm seeing feral forest gardens. Forest gardens that went wild, what survived without the attention and the careful management of the Maya who were living there. But all of these plants that we record and that the economic botanists said are, these 20 plants occupy in the area where I'm working, or Tikal, something like 70% of the well-drained uplands. These are well-drained uplands. So, you know, and you can see also, I put in there the pollination syndrome, and if you look, only Ramon is wind pollinated. All the others are pollinated by animals. They are biotically pollinated. they will not be visible. You can't say achoo when you hear the pollen of the ramon, not ramon, we'll say mahogany or whatever else is here. There's lots of wonderful plants here. Even though we have 2 palms, they are pollinated by animals also. So when we start looking at this landscape a little differently, remember, disturbance, we don't think disturbance is bad. Disturbance may be bad or may be good. You have to think of what kind of disturbance. I mean, if you're going to have humans on the landscape, I mean, even that, what's this, the person who got the award at Kyoto, he said, you don't see plants inside, you know. So we have to imagine how we're using the landscape. So the area around, I call it this infield, outfield. They have an infield home garden, and then they'll have short-term annuals, only 4 years, and then they'll move in, sorry, I didn't want to do that. They'll move into fast-growing perennials, and then closed canopy, mature forest. And this is a 20-year cycle, so trees aren't going to look like those beautiful trees like the amate I just showed in the last picture. There's going to be management, there's going to be selection, there's going to be thought in how things go, but 8 years of growing perennials and 8 years of mature canopy is going to be cover. We're thinking of sustainability. You don't want to just clear everything, and you need to have things that are going to hold things back, you know, and get the soils better. Again, you don't have to read everything. What you want to see here is that home infields are like forest gardens, and outfields are maize. The plants there, though, are the same. It's the proportions that are different. More annuals in the field and more perennials in the forest garden. So just giving you a tour, thanks to Macduff Everton, who is a photographer par excellence and really captured in this sequence we're going to see how the Maya use the landscape. So you can see the home and the fence around it. Do you see open areas? Not much, but they're certainly going to have some nice chiles soon. This picture is really amazing because when I showed this to my colleague Ron Nye, he says, that's a Yume-Eek. And I always called him a fire tender, but actually Yume-Eek is Lord of Wind. Eek is wind. And what is more important with fire? The wind. And these people, they know how to light the fire, they know what to put the backfire, they never use a firing of a milpa, opening the forest here, if it's a hot day, and if it's windy. And generally speaking, the people I've talked to do not ever consider lighting a fire after about April 15th. It's very, very dry. They want to have everything done by April 15th. That's sort of a modem. I actually was talking to some people at our local, in Belize, the local camp of the military camp, and I gave them a little lecture, and I told them that, and they says, wow, we better start looking at how we're using our munitions at that time. So they were thinking out of the box and thinking how they could use it. But this is an amazing picture that he's lighting. You can see him carrying the fire with him. And you might say, oh, it looks like a moonscape, but look at how many trees are out there. Do you see it? Is it raised earth? No, there are trees out there. Also, I want to point out these guys, these things. All of these were probably re-sprout. I thought they were put there to impale archaeologists on survey, but in fact, they re-sprout, so they turn into a tree. So not long, it looks very different. I guess that's green. This is a neat picture because I showed this to economic botanists at the New York Botanical, and I said, oh, isn't it neat? You know, you see they've turned down the corn is not, I mean, it's ready to harvest, but instead of harvesting, they just turn it down so you can wait to harvest it at whatever time. And the beans are growing up the stalks. He says, yeah, but look at some of the stuff down there. There's a whole bunch of forbs down there that are edible, too. He gave me names, but I need to have him look at it again so I can give you those names later. Anyway, they're forbs that are volunteering, and one of the things that my collaborators in the Maya Forest tell me that every sprout is a recommendation. Every sprout is a recommendation. So if you use a weed whacker or if you use a mower, you're not considering those recommendations. And I thought of something that happened to me, and I explained that to Alfonso, who's the quote's coming from, and I said, you know, every year I see another loquat growing, and I don't want it growing there. he says, well, you're taking the recommendation and deciding not to. And finally, it grew in a place where I took the recommendations, so now I have my loquat. This is rebuilding perennials, and you can see this is a former field that's right in the context of high forest. And you can see that it's an amazing, this is of course a modern one, so they wouldn't have had bananas, but they would have a number of different fast-growing perennials that would be shielding slower growing trees that are in here too, because this man, Zacharias, is a real master of master forest gardeners who really creates incredible, important, like he'll create ones that are dominated by hardwoods that he'll be selling. Really an amazing person. And this is one of his examples too. This is an orchard. All of these are trees that are producing fruits. And you can see that there's perennial trees. They're almost closing the canopy, but you're still seeing forbs and fast-growing perennials persist. You see the, of course, you see all the weeds that you would call them weeds that are they're covering, but also there's still, you know, banana things in there. Those are from the previous phase. So these are very mixed landscapes. And this is sort of an idea of how these operate. And you can see that each of these, I'm focused on the plants, but the plants create habitat. So we have habitat for birds, that, you know, the feathers that everyone sees these fancy headdresses for the animals they eat. A dominant animal in the middens is a white-tailed deer, loves ecotones. If you had just forest, you would not have a lot of deer. So really, a very important product of clearing and creating this cycle is also the fact that you're creating habitats that otherwise wouldn't be as abundant, and then increasing that availability, which is also important. Another thing I might mention, this fire. We really don't like fire, but the fire and the use of fire, as every 20 years you're reducing the fuel in one place. So it's also going to be a very important protection for fire protection as well. So when the Spanish got in this place, the same things were happening at the time the Spanish came that were happening in the past, as well as what the people I'm meeting. And in this case, you can see a 1552 ordinance, which is not long after the conquest of the Yucatan. This governor, must be a very nasty person, Tomás López Medel. He basically says, he makes it illegal, not very successfully, but makes it illegal to have milpas and trees in your house, and if they are, they're going to be burned. So that's a pretty heavy thing, and you can say that if it becomes an ordinance and is a documented legal point, that there must have been a lot of trees and milpas in homes. So that's the infield component. This is an architectural drawing, contemporary, so clearly they had that. So what would you expect to find? Remember, we're talking about deforestation here. Here are forbs. Now, they call this disturbance. They call this not forest and forest. But in fact, if it's all the wind pollination, what we're getting is all those perennial forbs and annual forbs that are showing up as disturbance, indicating a vital and successful milpa cycle, I would say. And drought, I have a hard time in my own way. There's no indication here of drought. If anything, things are getting better in terms of precipitation. But the real important thing is this whole idea of drought is they're saying it's happening, you know, I don't know, decadal or whatever. Their resolution is very, very gross, even if they knew it every 2 or 3 years, but it's more on like 10 years. So if they're saying there's a 10-year drought, their resolution is 10 years. But what they're not recognizing is what's really happening annually on the ground. There's a drought every year, and there are 2 rainy seasons. Now, many people who study this say there's the rain and the dry, but it turns out there is the first part of the rain, which is the, and this is the ITCZ, but that's the intertropical convergence zone, but that's the weather that's bringing everything from the east, the hurricanes. And then the other period is coming from, say, November, really December, January, February is coming from the north. They're called nortes. And that's run by the North Atlantic Oscillation. So if you're going to have a drought that's 1 year, full year drought, you have to be able to show that the intertropical convergence zone and the North Atlantic oscillation are operating in sync. And I don't think anyone who studies these things has been able to tell you that. So that's one part. But when you get down, now let's just say we accept the annual. So let's say it was 2,000 it should have been, it's now only 1,000, that looks like a drought. Might not be, because it's actually how it's delivered. Because if you get too much rain at one time, it can ruin your harvest, or too little rain, it can cause problems for no harvest. So you really have to understand it when it's delivered. So if you had too little rain overall, let's just say you had 1,000 millimeters that year, but it delivered good rain in June, and it didn't rain too much in September, October, you might have good harvest. So you really have to look at what people are doing on the ground and how they're responding to the climatic, the annual climatic regime. It's not annual rainfall obscures the actual variation that's happening for the Maya, you know. So next thing to look at is Scott Fedek, a colleague of mine. He decided that nobody had done it. He went through every bit of literature. This is not asking anybody. This is just looking at the literature. And he was able to document 497 native plants of the forest and the field that were used by the Maya today. So these are trees that everyone knows. And I brought here, do you know what an aril is? I learned because of this project. There are 13 different parts of a plant that they are using, and 10 plants in total. And anyone seen those pomegranates these days? Those little things we call the seeds, those are arils. And the seed is somewhere in there, but they're depending on you to eat it and deposit it somewhere. Usually they're birds doing it. I have an example here of an open one and an eaten one, just so you can see what happens, what their distribution pattern is. These arils are, apparently several plants besides the anato that has arils. But I mean, fruits make up 57% of these 497. Most fruits are on trees. Leaves make up 13%. 88% of the food plants are biotically pollinated, not wind. And most will still survive and still be productive with short and moderate droughts. Now, more severe droughts will cause some to not produce, but might not kill them, and some will not survive with that, but very, very few. Very important. And of these, a lot of people want to make a big deal about how everybody's eating maize, but it's a very complex set of photosynthetic pathways. Maize is considered very uniquely for the Maya area and for Mesoamerica to be a C4 plant. All the trees that have leaves are C3. But you can see the distribution here, 91% are C3. Cam is interesting. Those are all the cactus. So these are, if we go look at what the Maya ate, let's see, don't the Maya eat something? Well, let's see. Well, okay, we'll see what comes next. So we'll be looking at that, but we'll come back to this idea C4, C3. But I want you to look at this again. Remember the deforestation hypothesis. One of the things they say when you read about deforestation is it becomes a savanna. I ask you, does savanna mean grass to you? Because it means grass to me. So I had believed this until I went and did this research, but oops, don't know how to do this thing. But grass is, where's my grass? Well, now this is what I was looking for. What happened? This should have come there. Okay, well, let me get back to grass later. Thinking of these C3, C4, also the protein. Amaranth and maize are both the same type of photosynthetic pathway. So if you find in humans, which these are human bones, study of human bones from the Maya area, if you see that they're over here and say they're maize, you're eliminating amaranth. Amaranth, 20,000, I don't know, cargas were taken every year in Tenochtitlan for 30,000 cargas of maize. So amaranth was a very important product at the time of conquest. So I don't think we can eliminate amaranth, which is one of those C4 plants in the 497. The other thing is they say that they're eating white-tailed deer. We know they're eating white-tailed deer, that the protein's coming from white-tailed deer, but here's my little chaya plant. I have chaya bits here. You can take one home and plant it and have your own tree spinach and know that if you eat the leaves, the raw leaves have more than the boiled leaves, but boiled leaves residue, that is the water, has more protein. All those have more protein than deer. Here's the deer right here. So if they were eating a lot of tree spinach, it might look like deer. So with 497 plants, we got to not be generalizing and saying they're only maize and only deer, that there's a lot of different ways they might be eating. Plus, we can't say drought because there's an annual drought. See, and this is how, I don't know, this is what, if you were producing maize at certain yields, the Petén is a low yield, about 900, Yucatan is about 1,200, and Lacandon is 2,800. And this is showing simply with labor investment and the skills, you had to have the skills, that you can support 182,000 people, we've estimated, in 1,300 square kilometers of the upper Belize River area, and still have more than 50% at the lowest level, more than 50% of forest, and up to 38 plus 42, 80%. So depending on how you use the land, if forest is good, you're going to have a lot of forest. The one thing, though, is that lower yields produce more ecotones and give you more opportunity to have different animals. Yeah. So modeling the Milpa forest gardens, this is moving from all that big stuff to El Pilar. And this is some views of LiDAR. And you can see in the far one, that's a cross section. And I can see 2 ceiba trees. They signature very nicely. And then this is just a picture of what the site looks like, El Pilar, from the LiDAR. These are the returns for without those trees. So here's some little statistics. We had 20.4 square kilometers. We've mapped 2,339 mounds. That's not the large architecture. We have lots of large architecture. We've identified 139 important trees that are, among them are the dominant ones. There are 9 major soil classes. We estimate about a little over 200 people per square kilometer, making about 4,000 people, which is a very high number when you're thinking of in pre-industrial agrarian societies. The Ming Dynasty is proposed to have 65 people per square kilometer. Pre-modern Japan, 120. So 200 is very high, but that is very low when you look at what people are proposing. I'm just reading a book on population, and they are proposing numbers like 500, 800, 1,000 more. They're counting things differently than I am, and they are really creating a situation where indeed something would happen with the forest. They wouldn't be eating, I don't think. But this whole landscape provides what I call a cropscape that will provide food and shelter. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals have food and shelter, basically good nutrition and good homes, as the main ways that you should be providing for people. So we should know that we can provide it for the Maya as well. So here is how I'm looking at providing for the 4,000 people. This is an animated version of the Milpa cycle using, these are hectare squares, and 1/5 of them will be open Milpa or fields at one time, and then it'll follow by regenerating 8 years and mature 8 years. And the dark ones, the 6 square kilometers, are areas that are too steep. So if there's more than 15 degrees, we figure that there's erosion, there will not be anybody planting their milpa there. So we do the little statistics here, and we find out if we do this model, we have 2.64 available. And we're not talking about home gardens. And when I go and figure it out, we only need 2.43. So it at least matches well. And then if we add the milpas in the home gardens, we get a little bit more. But this is really very, very important for understanding how we feed. Because the milpa is not just, I'm running it on a proxy with the maize, but it has up to 30, 40 different crops growing among all those different recommendations that might be happening there. So this is really a very robust way of satisfying the food requirements. But what about what's happening in the perennial components? This has been one of the big problems for those USDA people. They look at it as wasting. You know, it should have it should be farmland. What are they wasting? First, it's not arable, and now even if you're using it, look at how they use fire. It's all just completely misunderstood. So I started looking at one of the things, and this is a big project, and I'm looking for help because I need something more mathematical to really get this onto the landscape. But I have finally determined that for each house, house mound, I'm mapping house structures. Now, they might not all be occupied at the same time, you can say that, but even half of them, we're talking about a lot of trees. So if all of them were, well, as I said, I had 2,339. Well, of the ones that are higher than 2 meters, I figure those are stone roofs, corbelled roofs. So I don't count them for perishable. I'm only counting the ones that have perishable structures, and that's 1925, of which we're trying to figure out how to do it. My team tells me that they can last 50 or 60 years, so I said, okay, we'll do 40 years, because that's my little model. So if I do that and do the division, I need to build 49 structures every year, and every year we'll need all these resources for every structure, 12 per house, 19 for the posts. Posts are very, very important. They have to be ones that have heartwood, that are, you know, really able to withstand being put in the earth. So, and if you're going to go and invest all this and have them thatched, and then you pick the posts wrong and they fall down, then you've wasted all that effort. So you can imagine what kind of investment we're talking about. So I end up with, 53 per square kilometer posts I need. So, you know, that's 6 per hectare. And then beams, rafters, and leaves. Leaves are one thing I'm sort of still working on. How are we going to? So I've already gone through several iterations with leaves, because the first estimates were, you know, we would never have enough leaves to cover anything. So this has to be also procured from this same landscape. Remember, these people too, they don't have any other way, but they're a tump line economy. They put everything on their back and they move it around. My team tells me, my collaborators, the master forest gardeners that help me with this, say they would not carry a post more than half an hour. Say that's 2 kilometers. Well, I say the ancient Maya, they'll go 4 kilometers maybe. But I mean, that means from every house, they have to procure not only all their food, but all their housing material. And that's over many years. And think of the planning. The forest didn't look like I see around Tikal, that's for sure. It was a very managed forest. So developing this model, I need to integrate those soil data that's coming on, the vegetation data, other environmental variables that we're operating with, evaluate the distribution of these construction materials. Is it possible to imagine that they can construct that many houses at one time? Because my maps aren't, those exist. Now, like I said, you can say not all of them are occupied, but any percentage of them is going to give you, they're going to have a lot of posts. And then what are the household needs also? You know, the other materials like animals, because that's their habitats for animals, and the furnishings. You know, I mean, houses have other things, not just hammocks. So this is the way I'm looking at it. This is sort of a little animation to look at to see that there is indeed a way to imagine it. And then there's this wonderful man, his name's Daniel Bayona, who's in Yucatan, and he did all these things for, I don't know, that movie Avatar and the Rings or whatever. But he's looking at the Maya issue, and I'm thinking that he can help me with imagining El Pilar. And he did this just saying that there had to be more trees. And I think this is more of a realistic way to imagine. He only has 3 trees, though. I need to get him a little more interested, at least the 20 dominant trees. So this is a landscape that I call a cropscape that was developed under the conditions of climate chaos. It was developed to be flexible and adaptable to a landscape that we see in the Maya forest. People, I mean, that's proof they're there. It lowers temperature, a tree, have you noticed it's not as hot under a tree as outside of a tree? Conserve water because it's shady. Of course, the trees, they have 497 different plants, of which 57% are fruit trees, so it's biodiverse. When you have trees in this cycle, they're helping build fertility. Of course, roots reduce erosion, so this is a long-term adaptive system that actually is averting risk. Short-term monoculture is for short-term profits, immediate profits, and this is not for profits. This is to have longevity and predictability. So it's a really important strategy, these principles that we should be applying everywhere. In the area where I work, temperature is already rising. We've got chaos in the precipitation. These are things happening right now. The forest garden would help. And of course, they're heroes. I call them heroes, but these guys are dying, I mean, my different people, Beatriz was a medicine person. Guadalupe, he really had wonderful flowers. Leonardo, he had cows. Not so happy about cows. 85% of the mammals on Earth are cows. But I mean, I don't think I can stop that. But he also had bees. So you can't, I mean, he needed the water and pollen for the bees. Alcario, he had, his plot of land was steep. And I had to write a letter for him to have them not take his land away because they said he wasn't improving it. It was a beautiful forest garden. Of course, and Heriberto Cocom and Zacarias, one of my most wonderful, so the people I know are vanishing, and every one of these people is an encyclopedia of practice. It's so hard. I can tell you things that they do and tell you wonderful stories of how I've learned, but if you're not there practicing, and Narciso, one of my most wonderful collaborators here, 12 children, not one of them is a farmer. So how are we respecting it? How are we respecting it? This is the side over there is Catherwood, and this is what you see today. Now, I don't know about you, but I think gravity is not just a good idea, it's the law. How did this go from this to this? A little bit of imagination, I would say, and not a lot of honesty about what the Maya. And this is something I saw in, this side is 1972, and this is 2012. This is when you expose these monuments and don't have them covered with shade and this is the kind of shade that is a problem. You have to have natural stuff that disperses the water in different ways and doesn't expose things. And what's really happening here is these biofilms. Now, biofilms are everywhere. We're not saying that they're good or bad, but in this case, when you actually clear everything and you dry it out in the day and it gets the moisture at night, it's drawn out in the day, the biofilms come and collect it. They want to take up the salts and they drop acid. And limestone, when you drop acid on it, turns it to dust. So that's a real problem. It's happening everywhere you see the Maya monuments. They're making ruins of monuments rather than monuments of ruins. So I'm proposing a different way. Get those forest gardeners, find a few of them, have them train other ones, get them up at the sites, start managing it in terms of the forest as a garden, and start managing it under the canopy, and start seeing a very big different way to see these monuments as windows into more honest perspectives. This is a little courtyard with that might have been very secluded, and you can walk in there and then experience those rooms. If you think it can't be done, this is a house I rented in 2005, just 2 years later, what it looked like. So, I mean, if you invite it in, it's not going away. And nobody next to me is using his thing, but this is, thanks to the collaboration, it's not hard. And when I first was doing the backyard, I don't think I have the backyard there, but I wanted to make sure we had this one plant. It's a trumpet tree, or called warumo. It's a pioneer, and they looked at me, they practically wet their pants. They were just rolled over in laughter because they said it'll come, and I said, how will it come? Where is it going to come from? Sure enough, the next year I had my warumo. Now, there was a problem because they knew I favored it, and they said, do you want your soursop or do you want your trumpet tree. You want to have the fruit, so I had to give that up. But I was very glad to know that that the animals would bring it. So I have tried different strategies for bringing importance to the forest garden, and one of the ones I did here is asked the Chancellor Yang, to provide the highest honor that the UC can give is called the Chancellor's Medal, and he awarded it in 2 years ago to Narciso here in the Belize delegation. And then because of that, the country of Belize felt very badly, so they got their Governor General, who is the royal presence, the King's presence in a Commonwealth, to present the meritorious citizenship to Narciso in Belize. So that's one way I've tried to bring out, but Narciso can't be the only one. We need to get more people. And so we're trying to put together, Larry's here right now, supporting to build this documentary. We're calling it, Is It the Last of the Maya Forest Gardeners? We want to see more. And so you can help us support this documentary, should you be so inspired. And thank you very much. Okay, there won't be any questions. Nope.
Fantastic, Anabel. Boy, it's amazing all the things you're pulling together here. In that last slide, it was so interesting when medicines were...
Yeah, everything. That, yeah.
I love seeing that. And I'm just curious, do you think...
Everything is medicine, it turns out.
Yeah, yes, that one.
Yeah, I mean, so many things have multiple uses, as you can tell. There's certainly, I don't remember how many plants I was looking at in total, but multiple uses is very, very important. You can have latex, like Chico Zapote gives you latex, but it also provides a fruit, and then the wood is amazing construction material.
So, you know, we did some work in Baja California, and what we were finding is that the living people now, they're more focused on the medicinal plants, the traditional medicinal plants, than really the food plants and everything. And I was wondering if it's like that there with the Maya, or are they still really subsisting on the food plants? And
Well, they certainly know about them. They call, all those 497 are probably called famine foods. You know, they're not famine. You couldn't even go to them as famine if you didn't know they were there. How would they be famine food? You know, if they, oh, we're going to only eat Ramon when it's a famine. No, you always are eating Ramon, but when there's less available, Ramon takes a higher thing. I have a feeling, well, when I first started this project, everyone wanted to talk about medicine.
okay.
But when you start building up the story and continue to talk with people, well, I mean, they're building houses, they're eating fruits, you know, you find out there's a lot more going on.
So who did this? Is that a chart you?
It's my team, yeah. These are all based on data that I have gathered.
Yeah, great. Just
Oh, can't hear me.
One thing I was reading about Indonesian economics, and one problem in parts of Indonesia was if you overpopulate, you cut down, you not allow enough time for the forest to recover. And you end up with just grassland.
You know, that's a problem of land tenure. In the times of the Maya, and even when I talk with the people prior to the development of land tenure in Belize, like I wanted to have a burden basket. It's called a shushak, and a friend of mine makes them, well, made them. And I asked him, could you make one for this exhibit I want to do? And he had to send someone out to get some of the materials because it used to be really handy. But land tenure and the lack of it, or the people who don't have land tenure, those are things that really are causing the problem. So if you don't have land tenure and you need to eat, you will clear land that's not yours or government or whatever. You will invade lands and things like that will happen. But if you have more secure land, I mean, the situation is so different now, but you need secure land tenure to have people manage their landscape these days. And we have that problem with communal land tenure is not acceptable as it had been. So the situation you're describing is a rear guard, no land tenure. I don't know if it's overpopulation because, for example, in Guatemala, you know, 90% of the land is owned by like 10% of the people. So what is causing the problem of landscape? It's the way it's distributed and the way the tenure is managed.
I'm very curious, what is the legal regime in the different countries now? You mentioned that the forest land systems have been made illegal, so is that something?
What, say illegal? No, I was talking about land tenure. So if the community used the landscape communally, and then what happened was after World War II and in the 50s, they started parceling land. So that's land tenure, that's making plots of land. So when you do that, and that's now the place you own, you're using it differently, you know, I mean, and so it's the access, if that land has become owned by someone else, it's not illegal. But then, I see, yeah, the invasion. Yeah. So get back to, so tell me what you want. What about the invasores?
So I'm just curious, what is the legal regime like? Is that?
It's not legal, but it's very, very hard to control. At least in the central Petén, we don't. The thing about Belize doesn't have. I mean, it doesn't have such a problem with land ownership. Most everyone can have some land. In Guatemala, it's not the case. So when populations see no land and they want to move in and they do it en masse, it's very hard. I mean, they don't have a regime to protect it. It has to be mutually, you know, like the Reserva de la Biosfera Maya. If people don't want to protect it, it just won't be protected. I mean, another thing there, they had right-of-ways for railroad, and they left them. They stopped the railroad, and then they decided to do it again to revive it. Everyone had settled on the rails, so that land was no longer available. And it's very hard to move off. In Latin America, I think it's different in Belize, but again, Belize doesn't have the same land problem. Most people can get land in Belize, and 50 acres. And if they pay a lease, if they pay their lease for some time, we'll say 20 years, they can own it. So there's still land. And even in the villages and the cities, the towns, which is very different from Guatemala. Yeah?
What regenerates the cultivatable soil?
Everything, it volunteers there. So that's an interesting thing. That's where we're thinking about how are they managing? They'll plant things. Of course, things are being planted. Even in the milpa, they have trees. I showed you how the trees would resprout. But of course, things would volunteer, and they'd have to be out there and deciding, do I want that or not want that? And if they're, like one of the people I had on Heroes, Heriberto, he was very, very into medicine. And so he gave preferences to medicine Narciso practically gives preference to anything native because if he sees a seed he doesn't know, he plants it just to find out what it is. So he tends to have more native species. But everyone has, these days has mango, citrus, banana, things that are definitely universal. We're 500 years past the Great Columbian Exchange, so lots of things are in everybody's tropical area. I've seen mahogany in India, I think I was in Bhutan, I saw chico zapote. These things are all over now, right? But they're going to be to really do a good job of it, I would say people aren't doing much now, but like when you go to Narciso's farm, you will see how he has open and closed spaces and how those are changing. You'll see open here, and then you'll go another time, and it's open another place. Other things are always going to be covered. So it's a practice that you have to be, everyone who has a garden themselves will know that if you're not out there, yours may be pleasant, but maybe that wasn't what you wanted there.
Thank you. Have you studied mycelium density in these areas?
What?
Mycelium density?
I don't know very much about that, but I do know one. You're talking about mushrooms, right? Yeah. So most of them I don't know very much about, but there's one that's called Sikin Che, and that's an interesting one because it only comes out it comes out when a dead tree happened in the dry season and then it rains, and hopefully there's sun because it happens largely in fields, but they get this one called Sikin Che. Sikin Che means tree ear. Che is tree, and Sikin, I don't know if I'm saying it right, Sikin is the ear. And you peel it off, and it's just a great mushroom. So yes, I know about that, but I don't know about many. There are mushrooms all over. Especially right after the rains, it's amazing and quite astounding colors and things, but I'm not very much of a specialist in that, except for Sikin Che. Well, thank you very much. I have postcards here, and I have chaya, and I have an example of an arrow. It's a local arrow.